Hi and welcome to Military Diorama. Today's video is part 6 in the log barn diorama for my early Tiger one, and I'm going to be covering the interior. I start off by fitting the floor. I'm using 1mm balsa wood. I airbrush both sides of the balsa wood with Vallejo old wood, which is 70310. Because this is a brush paint, I have to let it down with airbrush thinners. I repeat this on 3 more pieces of balsa wood to make sure I've got enough wood for the entire floor section. After I've painted both sides, I attach them to a piece of paper with some masking tape just to keep them down so that they don't get blown around by the airbrush. After they're all secure, I lighten the Vallejo old wood with IDF sand grey, which is 71141, and mottle the area of, mottle all of the balsa wood, and then I darken it using chocolate brown, which is 70872, and again I have to let this down with airbrush thinners as it's a brush paint, and I just mottle the edges. Once the paint is dried on the balsa wood, I start fitting it to the barn. I cut it out into thin strips, make sure it's the right length to go across the beams. I would alternate the length of these so it looked more like floorboards would, but because it's going to be covered up with straw and other things, you won't be able to tell anyway, so just put it in all in one go and then strengthen the edges to trim them off with other bits of balsa wood. I wasn't really looking forward to this part, but it actually went quite quickly. Once the glue is dry on the floor, I get some modelling clay and make some sandbags to put in the actual doorway there, and also around the internals of the barn to protect the machine gun crew from any infantry fire or shrapnel and whatever. I just roll out the modelling clay into about a centimetre thick sausage or half an inch thick sausage. Once it's the right thickness, I flatten it down. Once it's flat enough, I cut out about 1.5 centimetre long pieces and just model them to look like sandbags. It doesn't have to be perfect because they're going to be stacked on top of each other. I just repeat this with the entire sausage. Once they're all cut out, I start fixing them to the actual barn, just using PVA wood glue, or just any white modelling glue. I start in the doorway, just let them down slowly, building them up until I get the right sort of height that I want. Then I'll go onto the inside and lay them around the outside of the barn wall, just layer them up so it looks like someone's laid down sandbags basically. With each layer I put on more of the PVA glue just to keep them in place. Also, putting the PVA glue on, I think, prevents them from drying out too quickly and stops them from cracking as much. But just pushing them down so they look like the ones on the bottom especially have got more weight on because of the ones on top, so push the ones on the bottom down more than the ones on the top. This is quite a good technique. You can also do it with for the tops of like fronts of tanks for added armour. You can also use putty to make them. I find that putty doesn't crack as easily, but I had some modern clay, so I used it. And that's what it looks like when it's done. I think it looks quite realistic myself, but I'm quite happy with that. Next, I paint the sandbags with Vallejo black, which is 70950. Making sure I get into all the little nooks and crannies and the cracks, but try not to get it onto the wood. When I do get onto the wood, I just wipe it off with a little bit of water on the brush and just mix it into it, just make it look like part of the texture and whatever, just mix it, get rid of the excess paint. Once the black paint dries, I then paint the sandbags using Vallejo canvas, which is 70314. Not worrying too much about the gaps, because after I've modulated them, I'll go over with a little bit of lacquer with canvas in it, so it will sort of mix in all the colours together, so that it's quite a stark contrast, but again, with the little glaze onto it, it will make the colours all look realistic and mould into one sort of thing, and get rid of any black and blend it all in, and the black will act as shadows. Once the canvas is dried, the canvas paint, I make a few different colours, mixing hemp, which is 71023, and then the IDF sand grey, which is 7141, just making different colours to modulate the actual colour on the sandbags to make them look different. I do this on all the sandbags, on the exterior and the interior. It just gives it a little bit of variety. And then I'm putting some tarpaulins on the inside. I guess it's either the troops would have put them up to keep the inside of it a little bit warmer. If they've been there for a long time, they want to keep the barn nice and warm. So I'm using some Tamiya putty, 2-part epoxy putty. Mix this together and then roll it out on talcum powder so it doesn't stick. Just roll it out. I'm using a craft knife to roll it out so it's nice and thin. Use a pizza cutter to cut it because it's just quite easy. And also, once you've rolled it out to the right thickness, use a pizza cutter again to cut the edges off and make it the size you want, and just apply it to the inside of the barn so it drapes down and just looks like canvas or tarpaulins that have been hung up to keep the draft out. Just make sure it's nicely mixed together. It takes about, you can still work with it about 30 30-45 minutes after you've mixed it all together. It takes about 2-3 hours to dry properly, but you can still work with it up to about an hour afterwards. You can also use the epoxy putty, like I said before, for doing sandbags and also doing tarpaulins on vehicles and stuff. It's just a little bit more expensive than clay and a little bit more of a faff. I'd rather just use the modern clay for the sandbags. And once it's the right thickness, just trim it down to the right size that you want. Just using a piece of wood that I've got there, which is the right height for the panels to the floor for a measurement. Just drape it over the place where you want it, and then using a damp, well not damp but a moist paintbrush, you can just move it around and put it where you actually want it to be and form it over any, like the sandbags and stuff, to make it look like it's draping down. There's my head. Once they've dried off, I'll give them a coat of paint and some shading. And that's as far as I got on this update. Here are some stills of the finished tarpaulins and stuff. I'm not sure if I'm happy with it or not. I'll wait and see. I'll paint them and see how I feel about it. Next week, hopefully, I'll be getting the roof on and doing some tools for the interior, and hopefully finishing off the barn itself. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have, please leave a like, subscribe, and a comment. I reply to all comments that I'm left with, and I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next week.